Are we live?
We are.
Gotta get my glasses straight. What's up, man? How you doing?
Pretty good. I've got a public service announcement for anybody
Yes.
out there. If you own a Honda vehicle made before 2010, spray some WD-40 into your ignition lock.
Are these the ones that are getting jacked all the time?
No, they're not getting jacked. It's just your ignition. There's some pins in there, and they get dirty. And if you don't lubricate it, it'll get jammed, and that's an $800 replacement if you don't take care of it.
Did this happen to you?
I got around the replacement, but barely.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
I've been in that car.
Oh yeah.
Right.
In Chicago. Yeah.
Chicago. Yeah, you drove me around Chicago in that. Yeah. I thought it's funny. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I thought you were talking about the incredible epidemic of car thefts. What's it called?
Well, car thefts, but also catalytic converter thefts.
That happened to me. My catalytic converter got stolen a couple of years ago, but it's kind of amazing. I think, especially in the Midwest where you are, I think it started in Milwaukee, but some people found out that you can, what's it called? Hardwire? Not hardwire.
Hotwire.
Hotwire. Jeez, I can't think today. Hotwire Kias, I think, and there's another one too. The other Korean car. Hyundais and Kias. Apparently, they're really easy to hotwire. You just need a USB cord or something. And so all these dudes in the hood in Milwaukee just started jacking every damn Kia and Hyundai they could, and then going on crazy joyrides, like drag racing down residential streets and stuff and hitting people. They drive up onto the sidewalk. They drive into houses. They drive over little old ladies and little tiny girls, and total mayhem. And then this is such a cool thing to do that it's now spread to, you haven't heard about this? It's now spread to cities like everywhere. And right here, I mean, we see in the Bay Area, I have seen cars driving over 50 miles an hour in residential areas 3 times in the last 2 weeks in the middle of San Francisco. Like, it was crazy. And then they crashed into somebody. Clearly a carjacking. It was a really nice BMW right in the middle of San Francisco. Could have killed all kinds of people. I don't know. They might have, actually. We were driving. We had to get on the freeway. They almost hit us. But yeah, it's, I don't know. Back to, I feel like we are Breitbart. Do you know Breitbart at its height had a vertical called Black Crime?
Yeah.
Which was the ballsiest thing ever done. I mean, I'm not a fan of it, but I will give them credit for being super ballsy for the.
Hey, I'm a producer, man. I can make things happen. It's very easy.
The formal racism of it. You don't see, like, honest to God formal racism these days, except then. That was Breitbart was awesome. Black Crime. There you go. Thank you. Yes. Is blackcrime.com taken, I wonder?
Should be. That might be a different kind of site, but
yeah, it's definitely not .org. It's not a nonprofit. Anyway, sorry about your car, man.
All good.
Damn.
Got it taken care of today.
How old is that thing anyway?
That's an 03.
Yeah, I was gonna say it might be time. Just saying, to say goodbye, bid farewell.
Could be in a submarine piloted by a Sony PlayStation controller.
Oh my God, the socialist response to that has been useful, because it reveals quite starkly what is at, I believe, and of course I know this better than anybody, I just do, what is at the core of the socialist personality, which is envy, resentment, and then a burning desire for violent retribution. And that's really what they want. Redistribution, equalization, those are fine and dandy, but that's not what, like, they have a passion for. And that's what you saw with lots and lots of people on Twitter, especially talking. Yeah, here we go. So these people, I think this person is the smallest of the accounts we're going to look at. I think he has like 8,000 followers, but look at the tweet. Look how well the tweet does.
Yeah.
2.3 million views. And he's complaining that not enough leftists do want to kill the rich. Not enough of y'all want to kill the rich. That's a problem. Killing the rich is always has always produced outstanding results, you know?
Yeah, I remember the Hotep Jesus line, basically after any police shooting, when he advises the right on this, he says, always lead with compassion. And even if you do have a political agenda, it's useful to lead with, hey, it's an awful thing that these people died, because then you can garner some sympathy with your agenda.
Yep. I've said this many times publicly. I'm going to say it again. And partly because I don't care about spilling tea on my mother. But yeah, my mother, who's now 83 years old, and has been a socialist since she was in high school. Almost every time I see her, she mentions killing either Republicans, Trump, or rich people. I'm talking about with fairly specific graphic descriptions. You know, a bullet in the head was what she wanted for Donald Trump. That's her favorite line. Mm-hmm. For Trump, whenever he comes up, I want to put a bullet in his head, but yada yada. Doug Henwood. So Doug, I guess he's a friend of mine. He's been on the show. He's been in the socialist business since I was in high school, and it's still going strong. He has a radio show, which is really popular among the left. And he has Left Business Observer, which like I've been reading since I was like in high school. But so he's a fixture, Democratic Socialist of America type, you know, that world. And he routinely celebrates or asks for not so much killing, although I'm sure he would love to kill some rich people, but imprisoning rich people. Doug has a fetish for imprisoning the rich. I'm not talking about like Republicans who have been accused of malfeasance, which, okay, you could argue that they deserve prison. I'm talking about people who are simply, they're guilty of just being rich. This is common. This is common among socialists, not liberals. And this is one of the things that distinguishes liberals from socialists. Socialists actually want to do violence to the wealthy, or at least they say they do. Of course, many of the left are from wealthy families, which is always a hard thing for them. One of my best friends from college, who was like a big Antifa guy, one of the founders of Seattle Antifa, became a political science professor. He's from one of the wealthiest families in the South, former slave owners, the whole 9 yards. Very typical. Yeah, well, liberals don't want to, you know, they don't call for beheading people. I mean, this is basically the difference between the Jacobins and the French Revolution, you know, and like the more liberal reformers at the time who were like, hey, hold on, we want some reform, but we want to kill people. There is a bloodlust. I know this because I tasted it a bit myself when I was a socialist. There's a bloodlust at the base of socialism. There is a type of person with a type of personality who wants to do violence to other people they consider to be illegitimately superior to themselves. So this is Nietzsche's slave mentality.
And resentment.
What's that?
Resentment.
Exactly, ressentiment. Yeah. Right. So this is this is Nietzsche's analysis of what he called slave mentality applied to the 20th or modern left in America. It's just, I mean, I know a lot of people who like listen to us sort of know this already or have already a sense of this, but the submarine, the Titan incident and the left's response to it, and we only looked at one tweet, right? There were many tweets that were from like huge accounts from the left, totally digging it, totally loving these, including, and by the way, one of the people who died on the bottom of the ocean was this 19-year-old kid, the son of one of the billionaires, and it didn't hesitate. That's great for humanity to kill some billionaires. And we're not even getting into like what these billionaires might have done on behalf of humanity. You know, maybe they created and distributed things that, you know, we find to be quite valuable. I wonder. Yeah. But let's not be libertarian.
Yeah.
Because that's gross and nerdy.
I'm not sure if that 19-year-old was on the Titan. Was he?
Yeah, he was. Yes, he was. Absolutely. Okay. He was the son of one of them was like South Asian or Middle Eastern. Mm-hmm. And it was his son.
Okay, I'm thinking of somebody else then who wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw the populist right falling for this too. I saw a little bit of bloodlust, or just like, why do we care about rich people happening in the, like, oh, it's karma for these people messing around and doing their rich people thing. But the liberal response, you shared this article with me from the New Republic, like this complete dispassionate like investigation into who these billionaires were donating to. Again, no like
Amazing.
compassion for the tragedy of the thing. Just
this is my mother wanting to kill Republicans. That's what this is.
mm-hmm.
So it's not just rich people now. This is now the GOP, who, of course, completely ridiculously on the left is still considered to be the party of the wealthy, which is so hilariously wrong. I mean, especially now with MAGA. MAGA is obviously the only working class political organization in my lifetime in America. Yeah. So this is right. It's just, it makes no sense, because we know that the leadership of the Democratic Party, we know that the base of the Democratic Party is overwhelmingly middle to upper class. We also certainly know that it gets all of its discourse, its rhetoric, its ideas from where? From Ivy League colleges. We know that Ivy League, the elite colleges and universities, are the feeders for the Democratic Party. They're the feeders for all the nonprofits who are aligned with the Democratic Party. George Soros's, all of his hundreds and hundreds of organizations all around the world committed to social justice are staffed by graduates of elite universities and colleges. It's all Democratic Party apparatus. These are the wealthiest, most powerful people on earth, yet they nonetheless claim, first of all, that they represent the working class. The Republicans represent the upper class. And also the left wing of that group, as I said, has this blood. Oh, Doug Henwood, great example. Doug is from, and he admits this, he's from an upper class family in Connecticut. I think his dad was some major capitalist, actually. So, I mean, and he's not unusual. I've known lots of people on the hard left who are heirs and heiresses. And that's what enabled them to be socialists and communists. But yes, this bloodlust for the wealthy by wealthy people is an incredibly odd phenomenon. Only in America, by the way, can you pretty much find it, maybe in Western Europe. But you have to go into psychoanalysis to understand it, right? I mean, it seems to me it has to have something to do with the family, with resentment of the parents, a very deep-seated, heavy resentment of the parents, which results in violent fantasies that they can't express about their parents because that's not allowed in our society. And so they find another target, another object, and they channel that hatred of their parents to these other people out there who they envy, who represent their parents indirectly. That's all I got. I can't understand it any other way. I've been around those people my entire life. I, in a sense, was one of those people for a while. Again, I know this as well as anyone on earth. And that's always what I came away with. It must be that. This is a rich kid's fantasy world, left-wing politics, in which all of their psychological demons get projected onto political objects.
Yeah. Well, we here at Unreported represent the working class. We have Handyman Tennessee LLC with the 5. They won't allow Kias and Hyundais in the same parking garages in Nashville, but try graphite spray as opposed to WD-40.
Right. It's graphite spray sticks longer.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And one note on that, when I talk to socialists about like their whole fantasy of killing the rich, taking all their money and creating a utopia, I say you could kill the entire billionaire class and you would be lucky to use all of their resources to run the current federal government at about 4 months. Yeah,
right. Yeah. Or you could liquidate, every billionaire's assets and redistribute it equally to every person on earth, which would be that's the socialist thing to do. How wealthy would we be as a result of that? Not very. I mean, it might make for a decent quarter for some of us. It
would be like one stimulus check to the entire population.
Something like that. Yeah, it would be like in the tens of thousands, maybe dollars, and then we're done. And then the most productive people in the history of the world are out of business, and we'll see how we do then.
Yeah,
right.
But socialists can't do math. Like as soon as you start talking numbers, just the brain doesn't work.
Man, these libertarian economic principles just seem so obviously correct to me. I don't understand. I don't get it. Like, and again, I'm not a libertarian. I just think they're right about this shit. On economics, I totally agree with libertarians. On public policy, I would vote just like Ron Paul. Even on abortion, I would in fact give it to the states. That's Ron Paul's position. He's not anti-abortion. He doesn't want to ban abortion federally, but but yeah, I just, again, I just can't hit. I mean, Ben Burgess is the only person on the left who offers arguments against these positions that I find persuasive at all. And everybody should seek out Ben's debates with people like Walter Block, Dave Smith. He's done a few others, I think. Straight up head-to-head socialist versus libertarian debate. And I respect all those people a lot. And obviously, I'm actually on the side of the libertarians. But I got to say, every libertarian should listen to those, because those are the best arguments I've heard for a welfare state, for social democracy, and for socialism. He hasn't won me over, obviously, but like, everyone should test themselves if they're anti-socialist against Ben.
Yeah, Ben is more concerned with policy, and that's a big blind spot to a ton of libertarians, especially anti-vax. They see policy as just something to be completely avoided. Like, why would you even talk about that? We're anarchists.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so they're not used to getting into the nuances of policy, right? Because there always are nuances. I mean, I'm basically an anarchist, so I'm that way too. Like, my discussion about the specific law about what to do is very short always. It's like, get rid of it. I mean, I just don't want it. I don't really think we need any laws, but certainly not most of them. But yeah. But everybody should listen to Ben. He's done like, Gene Epstein. Yeah, that one too. He debated Gene Epstein, Soho Forum. He's done many. And that's another reason to praise the shit out of Ben Burgess, because he has gone into the lion's den over and over and over on big stages, and he has brought it to them every single time. You got to give respect, but also you're just going to learn a lot. Honestly, go test that. Go test yourself against Ben Burgess in one of those debates.
But yeah, this is what I always tell socialists. Like, if you're outraged about waste and spending and all that, like if you're outraged by Jeff Bezos's like multi-billion-dollar yacht, you should be more outraged by wasteful military spending that pales that stuff in comparison. Did you see this from the Pentagon about their most recent accounting error right here? I got the clip up.
Yes, 6 points.
Following up from some announcements earlier this year, during the department's regular oversight of our execution of Presidential Drawdown Authority for Ukraine, we discovered inconsistencies in equipment valuation for Ukraine. In a significant number of cases, services used replacement costs rather than net book value, thereby overestimating the value of the equipment drawn down from U.S. stocks and provided to Ukraine. Once we discovered this misvaluation, the comptroller reissued guidance on March 31st, clarifying how to value equipment in line with the Financial Management Regulation and DoD policy to ensure we use the most accurate of accounting methods. We have confirmed that for FY23, the final calculation is $3.6 billion, and for FY22, it is $2.6 billion, for a combined total of $6.2 billion. These valuation errors in no way limit or restricted the size of any of our PDAs or impacted the provision of support to Ukraine. And while the DoD retains the authority to utilize the recaptured PDA, this has no bearing on appropriated USAI or Ukraine PDA replenishment funding approved by Congress.
How many dollars is $6.2 billion? How much is that? What can that buy you? Like, what would it look like? Let's get some. You can't. These are numbers that are so big it becomes meaningless. When you get into the multiple billions, it ceases to be mean. And then trillion is just a pure abstraction. I mean, there's no meaning there at all. That's how vast this is. And this was just an accounting error, everybody, of $6.2 billion. I mean, just drip. I mean, okay, like that quickly, that much money can wash one way or the other, or disappear or reappear like magic, just that quickly. Yes. And socialists, let's take this back right now. Socialists and communists are by and large actually excellent on war and the wartime state and the military and imperialism and all that. The liberals and even the liberal left, like Bernie Sanders, Bernie Sanders is a big supporter of Israel, big supporter of the drone war. He's all in with Ukraine. That's the left of the party. Come on now. I mean,
yeah, but real quick on the socialists and communists, their hatred of the warfare state is often seen as a function of their hatred of capitalism. They think without capitalism, warfare would not exist.
This is true too. Yes, they don't hate war. They don't have the visceral. I don't think they have the visceral hatred of war that I do, and maybe you do, and other people do. In fact, we know they love war. I mean, they love like the Russian Revolution. They love the Cuban Revolution, the wars. They love the war part, the Spanish Revolution. They love that one. They love the fighting. They love their biggest heroes are the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, who volunteered and went over and fought in Spain for the Republicans. Fought, killed, died. Violence, bad, really bad violence. But so long as we live in a capitalist world, they're going to be anti-war because they believe that all wars are caused by capitalism, which is also totally fallacious. I've done a lot of research on this and found that businesses in the United States overwhelmingly opposed the beginnings of wars from the Civil War until the present time, overwhelmingly, except for banks and defense manufacturers, right? Arms industry. But everybody else was like, no, because it fucks up business. Like people, the left. But ask any leftist why they think wars have happened. They all say the same thing. Capitalism produces imperialism because of overproduction. They believe this thing, and then there's got to be this need to export offshore all this surplus goods that have been produced. They don't explain why this happens inevitably. This is Lenin's theory. Then capital forces the state to go abroad to open up new markets so that they can export all these surplus goods they produced domestically. Every leftist believes this. Every leftist, and most liberals do too.
But yeah, well, leftists often believe it because liberals make those explicit arguments. Like, like liberals will often argue that World War II saved us from the Great Depression, and that all the central economic planning that happens from war is a good thing for the economy.
Yeah. So this is where people need to understand one thing: American exceptionalism is a thing. Meaning that it is a religion. It is a belief system that is fully bought into by most of the political elite in this country and has been for 200 plus years. Dick Cheney divested himself entirely from Halliburton before the war started. He lost tons of money. Do you know how rich George W. Bush could be if he had stayed in business running his dad's businesses instead of being president? Do you know what kind of a pay cut he took? I mean, it's so idiotic, this idea. This is ideological. The people who run the wars, the people who start the wars, the people who build the military up to these heights, the people who goad Russia into World War III or try to, all these people, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon, the reason Vietnam was all ideological. All of it was ideological. It was based in the belief that the United States will uplift the people of the world if they're allowed to, if they can go in and overthrow their governments for them, and then they will save the people everywhere. I mean, that has been, as I've said many times, that has been the required buy-in ideologically for entry into the political class. Donald Trump broke the rules, and that's why they've tried to destroy him, because he was the one presidential candidate who didn't buy into that entirely. I would say he doesn't really at all, actually. He's not opposed to any war. He wants vengeance, and he wants people to not attack the United States. So he wants to be a tough guy for sure, but he's not an imperialist at all. He's an anti-imperialist. That guy's an anti-imperialist. He was the first one to not buy into that religion. And so he had to go. And this explains everything about the last, what is it now? 7 years. Russiagate, the impeachments, the current indictments, and it looks like they're finally going to get him, by the way.
Yeah. Well, you brought up Russiagate. I just have this clip prepared. Peter Schiff got censured by the Republicans following the Russiagate.
Adam Schiff.
Yeah, Adam Schiff. Sorry. Yeah, not the gold guy.
I was like, whoa. Yeah. Poor Peter.
Yeah, no, Adam. And the Democrats had a hearing on him on the House floor, and it's insane to hear like all this effusive praise towards Adam Schiff when it's completely on record that he just made stuff up.
If you can watch Adam Schiff give speeches, watch him operate, watch him do interviews, and you know, watch him for a while and think like he's a good man, then you and I are living in like completely different worlds, and there's no point in talking. I mean, this guy is so obviously corrupt and cynical and sleazy and manipulative, and deceitful and dishonest. It's like, and careerist and opportunist. I mean, this guy is like the slimiest of all the politicians in Washington, D.C. I mean, he is, which is saying a whole lot. He is the lowest. But yeah, you're going to show a clip?
Yeah, you got to see this.
Congressman Schiff protected us from fascism at home and abroad. First, on the so-called perfect call, Donald Trump withheld a meeting and crucial weapons from President Zelensky to protect Ukraine from Russia unless they gave him dirt on now President Joe Biden.
Adam Schiff during was it yesterday? What was it about? The hearing about something. He turned it into, Durham. He was grilling Durham and basically like grilling him for not being tough enough on the actual collusion that went on that was so rampant. Oh my God. Can we please have an exhibit somewhere of every single Facebook ad that Russia allegedly bought? You know, it would take up like maybe one wall and all of it would look stupid and childish, and not one person in the United States who's a grown adult would look at that for a second and think anything of it except that it's like some random piece of shit art from the street. Mm-hmm. There was they're still peddling this shit. Like even after Mueller, even after Durham, even after it's been all debunked 10 ways from Sunday, like I can't believe this.
Well, the big story with the foreign Facebook ads from that era is actually more about Black Lives Matter, in that Russia was behind a lot of the Black Lives Matter accounts. A lot of them originated from Australia. A lot of them just originated from abroad because they just wanted to sow dissent in general.
Yeah. There's a very, very important analysis going around that everyone needs to think about, which is that Russiagate was essentially not only a declaration of war against Russia, right? Because that's what the Democrats did, right? They declared, many of them said straight up, explicitly, this was an act of war. Like Jerry Nadler said that this was like Pearl Harbor.
Well, yeah, okay. So imagine a mastermind from another country installs Hitler as your president. That's the fiction that they're operating under.
Yeah. So Russiagate, the analysis, which I think is right, is that Russiagate was not only a declaration of war, and this is the part that just makes my blood get cold. It was a declaration of total war and a war of annihilation. So tantamount, similar to the Atlantic Charter in 1941, when Roosevelt and Churchill declared that they would fight the war against the Nazis, against Germany, until the entire Nazi regime was destroyed. That's what they did with Russiagate, right? They declared that this guy is our mortal enemy who constitutes an existential threat to America, right? And that's exactly what they said. That's what Russiagate was all about, right? Putin was an existential threat to us. So it was a declaration of war by the Democrats. Then they win, finally. Then they get into the White House and they make the war happen in Ukraine. And we now know, because of the discourse around Russiagate, and of course the discourse that started with the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, it's been a war of annihilation. They will not stop until Putin has his head on a pike, until he's been removed. This is also why they declared war crimes, prosecuting him for war crimes. You know, that forecloses any chance of negotiation, because why would Putin sit down to negotiate if they're going to put him on trial for war crimes and potentially hang him? I mean, of course he's not going to negotiate
him.
Peace. That basically says there's no peace unless you're gone. So, I mean, this is tantamount to an invasion by the United States of Russia. That's what this is. If it were flipped around and China were funding, a war by Mexico against the United States or whatever, we would see it exactly this way. That it's tantamount to, of course, we would see it as China invading, right? Would any American not see that as China invading the United States or attempting to invade the United States? That's what's going on, everybody. So this is actually World War III. This is the war between Russia and the United States that we have feared since 1917. And by the way, Woodrow Wilson sent troops on ships to invade Russia immediately after the Bolshevik Revolution to destroy the revolution, to stop it. There were US Marines on the ground in Russia fighting against the Bolshevik army in 1917. So it started right when they started being communist and anti-Western, and they haven't stopped. They're still going. They will not stop until there is a fully compliant puppet regime in Moscow. They have not had that since 1917. The Romanovs were cool, because they were all like interrelated with all the European monarchy. They were very Western, they would do business with the West, But no, when the Bolsheviks took over, when the commies seized the means of production and said, no, we're shutting shit down. We're not trading with anybody. We're going to be self-sufficient, baby. Then the West said, okay, it's on. We're going to have to kill all of you. We're going to have to kill all of you. That's what they did to Japan. That's what they did to Germany when they closed their economies. So Putin, he wouldn't play ball in the ways that the United States wanted, in trade deals that were favorable to the United States. He didn't want to do that. That's why he's got to go. He kicked out all the oligarchs. And you'll love this, Michael, and you've been telling me a lot to pay attention to the 90s in Russia. I think you're right. So, the story is that these oligarchs were working with the West to basically pillage and rape Russia, Mother Russia, as they were privatizing all the assets after the fall of the Soviet Union. So all these Russian oligarchs get filthy rich, and they have these deals with Western agencies of various kinds or other Western capitalists. The end result being that, and this is not disputed, that just massive amounts of capital just flew out of Russia and landed in London, Paris, and New York, and Los Angeles. So, and Washington, D.C. Lost my train of thought.
Well, the West.
Oh, yes. Sorry. So he kicks them out. Oh. So Putin's claim to fame, the reason he consolidates power is that he comes into power in 99, 2000, 2001. During that period, he kicks these fuckers out and starts to kick out these Western carpetbaggers, basically, who were stealing all the capital from Russia.
The eternal Yankee.
And that is when the United States decided that they will kill him, remove him from power permanently, and all of his ilk. So, because he did not play ball with the U.S. pillage, the Western pillaging of Russia in the 90s.
Well, that's the thing, is that the Western press constantly denigrates Russia for having this thing called oligarchs, which, by the way, the West doesn't have oligarchs. There's no billionaires with outsized power in the United States.
Wow.
Yeah.
I used to actually poo-poo that. I used to, when like, it was always lefties who talked about oligarchy in this country. I was like, oh, come on. Capitalists don't run things. I mean, still the state has the ultimate power, but the corporatism has reached such a point that it's so blatant now, it's so clear, especially with tech, the direct relationship, collaborative relationship between big tech and the government is such a central part, not just of the economy, but of the way we speak to one another, of the communication system. I mean, it's all up in our business. This powerful corporatist monolith is just like all over us all the time. Fascism. It's a form of fascism. Yes. Sorry.
The Soviet Union collapses, and all the industry is formally nationalized because it's communism. And then the Western banks and Western powers divide up all those nationalized industries into individual shares and distribute them amongst the population. And your average, peasant class is not going to be able to do anything with those shares. So they sell them in the immediate time for food. And all those shares consolidate in the hands of gangsters, which consolidates to people, bankers and whatnot. And this entire gangsterism and oligarchyism that the West constantly criticizes Russia for is completely a result of how they handled the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Yep. We have oligarchs in this country running things, no doubt about it. But also, yes, it's such an important story. Putin's war with the West is, I think it's the most important story right now in the world. Everyone, if we understood that, if more people understood that story, there would not be war in Ukraine. I promise you.
And the Western press constantly like says that the Russian people have this nostalgia for the Soviet Union and they want the Soviet Union again. Well, you would have nostalgia for the Soviet Union if you were alive during that time and you remembered that when the Soviet Union collapsed, you were starving to death much worse than you were when there was a strong central state that had your interests at heart.
Yep. Yeah. I just wrote the story of Vladimir Putin's brother, Victor, who was a baby during World War II, and he died of diphtheria, but mostly he died of starvation. Putin's father was fighting on the front lines in the trenches just outside of Leningrad, defending the city, and his brother was an infant, and his mother was left alone inside the city during the siege of Leningrad, when the entire city was sealed off. No food could come in, nothing could come in the city for 3 years. And there were corpses stacked on the streets in Leningrad. Hundreds of thousands of people died. And Vladimir Putin's brother, Victor, was one of those when he was a baby. His mother collapsed at one point and was being carried off to the morgue. And then she regained consciousness, and she almost got incinerated. I mean, half his family got wiped out by the Germans. So, and he's totally like every other Leningrader, everybody else from Leningrad, everybody from Moscow, everybody from Soviet Union, anybody who has any family in the Soviet Union has lots of dead relatives. I mean, killed in World War II. I mean, it is a huge thing. And I visited the war memorial in Leningrad, the cemetery, which has these mass graves. You can't believe how they're like the size of football fields. Each one has thousands of bodies in it. It's a huge thing for the West to be arming Germany and then having Germany arm Ukraine, and then having Ukraine use those German Leopard tanks and other weapons to kill Russians. Right there where so many people died. Exactly there. That was Operation Barbarossa. A lot of it was centered in Ukraine during World War II. More people died in Operation Barbarossa, the war between Russia and Germany, than in any other human conflict. This was the deadliest thing in human history. So that's what they're reenacting that, the West, NATO, the United States, they're reenacting the worst thing that's ever happened to human beings. They're attempting to right there on the steppes of Ukraine in the former Soviet Union. Yeah, it's just so all we can do right now, because there is no anti-war movement anywhere. All we can do, those of us who are conscious of what's going on, we can hold our breath, and that's all I can say. We can hold our breath and hope that there isn't some major mistake on the battlefield that triggers a nuclear war. It can happen at any moment. Now they're introducing F-16s, Western fighter jets, to, I guess, presumably take on Russians in dogfights. These are going to be U.S. made, U.S. trained F-16s fighting Russian military jets. I mean, it's just, so anything can happen. A missile from one of our jets could go astray into Russia. I mean, that's going to happen almost certainly. Just all sorts of ways in which World War III could get triggered. The Cuban Missile Crisis, lets us know that when you reach a certain level, a height of tension, that so many different things can set it off. Very small little mistakes can set it off. And so, but there's a zero anti-war movement. So all we can do is, as I said, just pray, hope, keep talking about it, but no one's listening. No one cares. So it's very, very scary. Yeah.
The libertarians who aren't good on Ukraine, and a lot of the socialists who aren't good on Ukraine, something tells me that their position on this exists because they don't grasp the severity of the conflict. They see this still as a small little conflict in Eastern Europe, and I don't think they grasp the global implications of this yet.
Well, yeah, I mean, who knows why no one cares, but I think the main reason is it's so complicated. First of all, it's remote geographically, it's just not near anybody. It doesn't really affect anyone directly. That's number one. Number two, as I said at Icarus Fest, when the United States started fighting its wars through proxies like Ukraine, that added yet another level, sort of separating American citizens from the fighting itself, right? Yet another barrier between us and experiencing the fighting, like operating everything through drones and special operations forces. That was another way to do that, to separate American citizens and civilians from the wars that we're always fighting. That was number one. And then, and now with using proxies, proxy states like Ukraine to fight our enemies for us is another way we distance ourselves. And it makes it even more difficult to understand the fucking war, right? When another whole government and country is fighting for us in this thing against the Russians in this other part of the world that no one cares about. It's like they grow wheat in Ukraine. Who cares? I mean, yes, it's sort of important for, agriculture, but it's not, the world didn't stop. We didn't have mass famine because of this war. Anyway, so like, I don't know how to break through. I don't know. I really don't know. I wish someone would come up with the magic means of getting into the heads of your average Americans about this. How do we make it into Vietnam in that way? In that, by after the Tet, well, that's how. I mean,
yeah,
right after the Tet Offensive, when lots and lots of boys came home in coffins. That's when the anti-war movement became a mass movement. So when Vicki Newland and all the neocons and all the neoliberals in Washington get their way, and because they want troops on the ground, they want U.S. troops on the ground, they want the Navy SEALs, they want all of that shit, they want to go in hard, they want the whole Marine Corps on the ground fighting and dying in Russia, overthrowing Putin's government. When they get that with Russian artillery, the infamous Russian artillery blowing our boys to bits for what again? Yeah, then we'll get an anti-war movement, and then we will end this war.
Well, this is the Jesse Ventura anti-war case for the draft, because
I can't get behind it, but I do admire the logic. Yeah, I mean, I hear him very loudly. His point is a really good one in saying that. I will never support a draft, but I will never support the enslavement of me or my son or anybody I care about by the government to fight and kill in a war they may not believe in, or they probably don't believe in. That's just doesn't seem like a cool thing to me.
Yeah.
Slavery, but the worst form of slavery doesn't seem cool to me.
Yeah. If you had like an actual equitable draft where rich people couldn't get out of it, which was closer to the reality in Vietnam and World War II, you had like the aristocratic thing where a wealthy son would go off and nobly fight for his country. That was a thing.
Now, you know who got exemptions during Vietnam? College kids.
Yeah.
College kids. Let's see. A war started by the Democratic Party, colleges where Democratic Party dominates, I mean, you promise to go enter the ruling class, our ruling class, the Democratic Party ruling class. Oh, we won't send you off to die in the jungle. Right. I mean, no, has anyone ever put that together? I'm not sure. This was very much a ruling class decision to exempt college kids, not because, they're the hope of our nation, they're the future, none of that shit. No, they're future Democrats that we're saving, because college kids became Democrats overwhelmingly. Yeah. Well, never thought about that cynicism.
We currently have like a draft by proxy where there's like no economic hope for the lower and middle classes in a lot of ways. And so one of the few options you have as a young person with not the best grades in the world is to join the military. If you really want to get your life together and be disciplined, that's one of the few options you have. And
we saw a Marine Corps. I guess it was during the NBA playoffs. There was a Marine Corps ad running during the NBA finals. And it was all about, and I know this is really common, I've seen many of these ads by the services. It was an ad making war look all like a video game. It was just all like, they made it, I mean, almost explicitly, they made it like a video game. The shooting was of these like creatures that look, like you'd see in a video game that then become sort of vague soldiers or like an enemy helicopter. You shoot it down. It looks just like Call of Duty,
Well, the U.S. military works with Hollywood and video game producers.
Extensively.
Military. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the most sickening thing I've ever seen. I'm imagining, they're sitting there thinking, what does the average 16-year-old boy do these days? Oh yeah, that 16-year-old boy sitting on his couch in his mom's house playing video games. How do we get him to sign up for the Marine Corps so we can go to Russia?
Well, this is my conspiracy theory. Any young person too, will know the term "no Russian," and that was the opening level in Modern Warfare, either 1 or 2, and it was one of the most graphic things that's ever existed in a video game, where you basically play as the terrorists on the first level of a video game, opening fire into an airport with civilians running and screaming away from you, and you are a Russian as you do that. So it's the most dehumanizing propaganda, and you're doing it as a Russian.
If I saw evidence that aided military recruitment, I would have a problem with it, but it does not. You know, we now know they are bleeding recruits. You know this, like every year now, they're getting fewer and fewer people are signing up for the military now. I think that's partly because of the obesity epidemic.
Yeah, they're lowering the standards constantly.
And if you think about the population that tends to send their sons into the military, that's the most obese population, right? So, I mean, really, honestly, that's probably the biggest problem, that these guys guys who would want to be in the military just aren't fit enough. It's kind of amazing. What does that say about late stage empire?
Yeah, and
the decadence of late stage empire, I would say, right? God damn.
Yeah, and Brian McClanahan has been doing a lot of reporting on this, in that they're taking the names of Confederate generals off of military bases, and they're wokeifying the military, and that's basically a middle finger to the South, which has been the largest recruiting base for the military ever, and to disrespect what they see as war heroes, and to elevate diversity propaganda that is completely antithetical to their way of life is drying up their recruiting base.
It's funny you bring that up. There was an unbelievable academic study and then an article written about it today from the National Bureau of Economic Research, very prestigious agency. And then it was written about, I forget which one of the major liberal magazines, done by several academics, 5, I think, academics, economic historians, laying out this whole argument that the racism in the United States that's in the North and the West was all brought to those areas by migrating Southerners. That all of the racism in the United States was caused by Southerners disseminating their racist ideas. So yeah, they look and they're like, they find, like Indiana, right? They're like, oh, Indiana has all these Southern migrants and it's so racist. The Ku Klux Klan was there. Therefore, this means that racism has always been caused by this original sin of the South, which we talked about at Icarus a lot with Gone with the Wind.
Yeah.
What an amazing conversation that was. We're going to be releasing that pretty soon, by the way, with Jack, the Perfume Nationalist. Incredible conversation, incredible film. Yeah, the original sin of the South is one of the most grotesque things in American political life and cultural life. There was so much beauty in the Old South. And if you don't believe me, just ask the slaves. The slaves very much, many slaves at the time and afterward had very fond feelings about the culture of the South, and including their conditions, and how people lived and behaved as slaves, So, and you have to acknowledge that. And this is true in feudalism. This is true in monarchies. A lot of the lower classes enjoyed it much more than being Democrats, being small d Democrats, and participating in governance and being, disciplined and responsible, socially responsible all the time, and going to meetings and running. No, they knew the king ran stuff and they were happy with that. And they didn't want to run things. They didn't want sovereignty. They wanted to be free. How about that? Sovereignty is not freedom. Anyway, sorry, tangent.
I had a point to make about Juneteenth, but I don't have my facts straight, so I won't make it yet.
Bullshit. I mean, the quick word is that, it was like 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. This was a declaration. Go ahead.
I got my facts right, but yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Juneteenth is supposedly the day the final slaves were freed, but there were slaves in New Jersey up until December of 1865.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, slaves were being freed beginning at the beginning of the war. I mean, every time the Union Army would take a plantation, they would just let the slaves go, or actually they would take them to sorry, I take that back. They would take them to what were called contraband camps and imprison them in those camps, and then force them to live according to Northeastern Puritan values in various ways. It's an incredible story no one ever talks about. But yeah, they actually put the ex-slaves into concentration camps, which they called contraband camps.
Yeah, but also,
so they were free though, but they were free, technically free.
But the Union had slaves. It had, in some instances, more slave states than the South, and you could argue. And New Jersey had slaves imprisoned until December of 1865 that weren't freed. So,
yeah, I mean, I would say those were the exceptions, but I mean, it's just.
Well, again, if you cared about the institution of slavery, this is what I'm trying to get at. Yeah.
Please, are you kidding me? No. I mean, Abe Lincoln said it over and over again. He is shouting at you from the afterlife in those pages of everything he wrote and said. He says it over and over again. I didn't give a fuck about the slaves. Mm-hmm. The reason we fought this war was to preserve the Union. I mean, he's yelling at us. He's very cross with all these lefties and liberals who claim that it was all about slavery, such a noble cause. No.
Well, the black nationalists were the first to get that one right, calling.
Yes, they were.
Yeah.
Yes, they were. I don't know what Garvey said about it, but I know the Nation of Islam was all over that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Malcolm X was all over that. Understood that right away. This is why, again, miss Malcolm every day, that cold, sharp analysis, unsentimental analysis with zero attachment to America or to white people, either including no wounded attachment, which is how most black political elites operate. They have a wounded attachment to whites. They want to be loved. They want to be accepted by whites. And they're always angry that they're not being fully accepted and wanted by whites. Malcolm didn't have any of that. Didn't mean he hated whites. He just didn't care one way or the other. And so you got cold analysis like this analysis of what the Civil War was really about.
And everybody should read the Harlem Renaissance writers, Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, those two, I mean, I would say read Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes. Mm-hmm. The rest of the Harlem Renaissance is uneven, I would say, but those two are so brilliant, it takes the breath away.
But and if you want to understand the racism of the North and what that was like, you got to read them.
Yeah, we should do something. We should do something on Langston Hughes and or Zora Neale Hurston, because Langston, wow, both of them breathtaking. Just and sort of like based before anybody was being based. I mean, they were like way ahead of their time in so many ways. Langston was incredible. The Negro and the Racial Mountain. Everybody should read that right now. Go get that. It takes about 10 minutes to read, or less, 5 minutes to read. The Negro and the Racial Mountain. It's kind of like sums up a lot of my politics right there. Love him. Beautiful, beautiful poet too.
Cool. All right. We gotta talk about RFK.
Okay, yeah. So we have a special guest coming on. It's not RFK Jr. It's someone much more interesting. It's Sam Husseini, who, as people who listen to this show will know, he's been on Unregistered before, and he just made an amazing appearance at the Icarus Fest, where he and I had an awesome conversation, laying out the whole history of the origin of the probable, I should say, origin of COVID in the Wuhan lab, funded by the NIH and the US government, overseen by Tony Fauci. That whole story, which we begin it during World War II at Fort Detrick, in the beginning of the bioweapons program by Franklin Roosevelt, is the beginning. That there's an unbroken chain from Fort Detrick and World War II all the way to COVID, everybody. And that's what Sam and I put together. And that'll be an upcoming Unregistered episode. So I can't wait to get that out, because I'm serious. Sam's work, we need to amplify it. He just does not have nearly a big enough audience. He's the best journalist working on lab origins. He just is. I know this field. He's the best, and he's on the cutting edge of all of it, of every aspect of it. I go to Sam to get like what's really happening with the lab origin thesis. There's about a dozen journalists working on the issue, but he is the best, and everybody should subscribe to his Substack. It's just called Husseini. So yeah, we're going to talk about RFK. Sam has some things to say about RFK that are extremely illuminating. Actually made my jaw drop at Icarus when he told me. I did not know stuff. Sam lives in DC. He's been involved in sort of dissident politics in DC since the 1980s. He and I were the same age. We came up together at the same time, I mean, and we were involved in a lot of similar stuff. I lived in DC for a while doing a lot of the same kind of work he was doing, a lot of peace, anti-war, anti-nuke stuff. So he's been around, he knows inside Washington really well, and he knows a lot of stuff about Kennedy that's going to, I think, change some people's minds about him. So we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about the state of the COVID lab origin thesis because of what happened with the Wall Street Journal just now. But I guess we'll wait till Sam comes on. He'll be on in a few minutes. So what should we talk about in the next 4 minutes?
Well, I think we should set up just RFK being in the news and his beef with Peter Hotez and Joe Rogan.
Oh, right. Yeah, I mean, well,
Well, first of all, the recent episode with RFK Jr. is actually really, really good. I think Joe Rogan, he's not as incisive as we'd like him to be sometimes, but I think he serves the purpose as like a Larry King in that he gives a really good long form interview and gives his guests an opportunity to tell us who they are. Because what that episode accomplishes is it tells you how does a Kennedy, start out as a Kennedy and be this new countercultural figure that he is now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little bit hesitant to shame someone for not accepting a debate on a huge public stage. I mean, I don't want to be in the business of like trying to force people to do things that are so high risk and so high stress. And, it's a big deal to like debate someone on Joe Rogan show with 20 million people watching. I've been there. Like it's a big deal. If it goes well, it's awesome. If it goes poorly, it sucks so hard you can't believe it. I mean, you feel like you're swimming in hatred. So,
well, no, I mean, Hotez was very thoroughly embarrassed when he was on 4 years ago when Joe Rogan did the paternalistic thing of asking him, does he work out and what's his diet like?
I was on 3 times Rogan show. Sorry. And Sam needs the links.
Okay, I'll send him again.
Okay. And every time he gave me some advice about my health, he would give me supplements to take or tell me to start taking testosterone or tell me I should buy a kettlebell and do particular workouts with it. And God damn it. So yeah, that's a Rogan thing. But yeah, I don't think he owned Hotez there because I just thought he was kind of paternalistic.
Well, that's a legit claim if you're a health expert, like especially all these government health officials who are comically unhealthy. I don't think Joe was, well, he kind of was explicitly making that point. Like, why do you care about vaccines so much? You don't even work out. You eat junk food all day. Do you really care about health?
Doesn't make him wrong though. It's an ad hominem argument.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, essentially, it doesn't mean he's wrong at all. I mean, there have been lots of out of shape doctors who I'm sure are great doctors who make the right decision about most things. Right.
Yeah. I could see somebody like that having specialized knowledge, but just anecdotally, you would expect a health official to actually, somebody who cares about health and makes that their profession, to take every aspect of their health seriously.
I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that, but okay. But apart from all that,
but
so
funny.
I mean, well, the thing is that he has been so public, and so he's been in the media so much. It kind of I don't see a reason why he wouldn't do something like this, especially when he so publicly states that Rogan is an idiot and completely wrong, and RFK is an idiot and completely wrong, and he knows everything. And so, yes, I mean, given all that, yeah, it's a complete dick weasel move.
Yeah,
or weasel dick move, to be technical about it.
If you're gonna shoot debates, don't throw stones like that.
Yeah, so I totally agree. So is Sam here?
Sam's not in the studio yet. I sent him the link again.
Okay.
Yeah.
His car is running late. He's getting traffic. Used to be always traffic issues when people were late to shows.
Oh, shoot. Maybe I should email him the link. I think that's what he meant.
That's what he said.
Ah, shoot. I'm not sure if I have his email. Could you text me his email?
Oh, jeepers.
Yeah.
Okay. Well-oiled machine here.
Yeah.
Damn, how do I find what's the fastest way? I had to shut.
We are live, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh my God. Now I'm like blanking on how to do anything. Okay. his.
Oh, he's in the studio.
Yay! Thank God, because he's here.
Apologies.
It's all good.
Crazy
It's
day.
all good. Thank you, Sam, for coming.
Of course.
I was just extolling your virtues. I don't know if you heard, but talking about how I still maintain you are on the cutting edge of the lab origin school of thought in all its aspects. Not that you're always doing the particular primary research on every area, but that I just feel like your ideas about it are always a bit ahead of everyone else's. But I was saying to everyone that I just want to amplify your voice, because I just think that it's the only way to peace and it's the only way to a world in which we don't have pandemics like COVID. So let's talk about what happened, because I think maybe I'd actually guess it's the first question for you is, this week seems like a huge turning point. It seems like the establishment, for lack of a better word, has started to change fundamentally its discourse about the lab origin thesis, and pretty much close to, I would say, the language, the way they're talking about it. Some outlets, and in particular the Wall Street Journal, but others, seem to be talking as if they've given up on dismissing the lab origin thesis, that basically they're accepting it. Is that how you read what happened with the Wall Street Journal? Let's say what the Wall Street Journal article was first, right? It was.
Yeah. You have to keep in mind, though, that the Wall Street Journal has been tending in this direction for some time. They were the ones who broke the first story,
Right,
citing anonymous officials in the spring of 2021, that basically began the collapse of what I call the Daszak narrative, or the natural origins narrative, which had been pretty much dominant up until that point, which was insane. You might say that this sort of is the bookend to that piece. That this is potentially the final death knell of anyone taking seriously what was the dominant narrative. But I still throw a lot of caution into this. The spring of 2021 piece.
Hang on one second. Sorry, I just want to make sure everyone's clear about what the Wall Street Journal article says.
Sure.
Which doesn't. It's not a lot, but it's a pretty big confirmation of some suspicions. Which is that, what is it? 3 scientists working in the Wuhan lab in November contracted COVID.
Right,
and that they received U.S. funding. Right, that they were receiving U.S. funding.
Right, and that at least one of them was one of the primary researchers on the type of dangerous lab work involving coronaviruses.
Okay, right. November 2019.
November. So this would put it before all of the suspicions around the Wuhan wet market and all of that. So if this is true, and that could be a big if, because part of my caution is that this is all sourced to anonymous U.S. government officials, and I don't need to tell you or your listeners that could be problematic, and there are other things about this reporting that cause me concern.
But why would they leak it? Why would someone leak it within the government? Because that's how it would. Is that what you're suggesting? This might be a leak or a series of leaks?
Well, it is a leak.
Yeah, right. So, right. So why? But what's the motivation other than it's true?
There could be several motivations. Well, first off, maybe I should back up a second here.
Okay.
There was supposed to be 90 and a few days ago, Congress unanimously, or very near unanimously, passed legislation, and Biden signed it, which said you have to uh, declassify all information relating to COVID origins, in particular, these series of questions and issues regarding the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This was missold to the American public by its sponsors and by major media as declassifying all information regarding COVID origins. So I already got my hand on my wallet here, worried about how this is going to unfold, because this legislation was sold in a false manner to the US public. That right there causes me concern. I wrote a piece on Friday, what I thought would be just a couple of days before the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, was supposed to declassify this information and produce a report to Congress. She has not done so far as we know. I guess it's theoretically possible that she has done so and only handed it to, the Gang of Eight, or, who are the committee chairs of the intelligence committees and, so on. It's possible that they did that and nobody said anything, but it looks like they didn't do that. It looks like the Biden administration is in open violation of the law. So in the midst of the approach of those 90 days, you saw these several stories. The Wall Street Journal was the third in a series of stories. One was in the Sunday Times and one was in Public with Taibbi and a couple of other people involved in the Twitter files. Schellenberger, exactly. Yeah, he was the lead. So it looked to me like there was a rollout, and right at the same time, Blinken was in Beijing. So it seemed to me part of some kind of coordinated plan to either leverage this against the Chinese or to cut a deal with the Chinese or something. It just I was just like, okay, what are the multiple possibilities here about what's actually going on?
Wow.
And I got to say, I didn't say that they would, put out the information. I said presumably in a few days she will distribute the information.
Haines,
okay. But she apparently has not done so. So one interpretation for these leaks is that this is valid and good information, and Haines is trying to prevent it, and they are attempting to force her hand.
Would this include the USAID documents?
It could. The one of the pieces, I think the Sunday Times one, said that their source was State Department. It's possible that somebody at the State Department is attempting to force this information to come out.
Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No. So that's one interpretation. One interpretation is that this is good and true information, and this actually is the beginning of the pandemic, and Avril Haines, for whatever reason, doesn't want to put it forward. And backstory is that Avril Haines and Blinken were both at West Exec Advisors, which was a consultancy firm prior to effectively swallowing.
Which, if my memory serves, was like a collection site for the big humanitarian interventionist, liberal imperialist types like Samantha Power.
I believe
those types kind of grouped around West Exec. And
Samantha Power herself is now head of USAID.
That's exactly right. Right.
And USAID has, people are surprised, naive scientists types are surprised. Why is this whole thing being run out of USAID? Well, USAID has a history of being like a soft power CIA.
Right.
It, goes into countries under humanitarian guise and does all kinds of skullduggery.
Color revolutions.
Color revolutions. Sometimes they involve big tech. They tried to launch a version of Twitter to free the people of Cuba that was used to try to undermine the Castro regime, so on and so forth. So, that's a very serious concern.
So Samantha Power is not going to be directly responsible in any way for COVID, though, because she became director after.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. But you're going to have, people who are sort of in the permanent,
Oh, yeah.
state. And another thing that causes me a great deal of concern, and I mentioned him in my recent piece, was Robert Kadlec. And
Yeah.
he's actually quoted, I think he might be the only person quoted in the Wall Street Journal piece. And he has an incredible history. He was the biodefense advisor to Bush when, post 9/11, and post the anthrax attacks, when they, juiced up all of the funding for the so-called gain of function work. Tens of billions of dollars went into that, which is what led us to our current state. Effectively, the dismantling of the Biowarfare Convention after the anthrax attacks. And he goes even back further than that. He was involved in a whole series of anthrax vaccination efforts that some charge led to Gulf War syndrome in the 1990s. And he created a position when he was with Bush under HHS, under Health and Human Services, that would oversee pandemic policy.
Right.
And
Lockdowns.
Lockdowns, but also vaccination policy.
Yes. Right. Exactly. Yes.
And
it's all intertwined. It's unbelievable. Yep.
And then when Trump came into office, he inhabited that position, the position that he himself created many years before.
Robert Kadlec. Yep.
Yeah. Whitney Webb gets into this. She wrote a huge piece on him at the beginning of the pandemic called Head of the Hydra. She basically, sees him as the one really calling the shots.
Oh.
And the most recent incarnation of Kadlec is that he has been a staffer, a major staffer. I mean, staffer is like an understatement, of the Senate, writing the reports in the Senate.
Oh, no.
That basically, have created much of the current narrative.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So
the fox is guarding the chicken coop.
Correct. So that causes me additional concern over this entire narrative, that this is just simply a backup narrative after the zoonotic origin narrative collapses. Is this the truth, or is this simply a backup narrative in order to A, pin all the blame on the Chinese,
right,
and B, ensure that U.S. creation of potential pandemic pathogen work continues?
Right. The big political problem with all this right now is that MAGA Republicans and Democrats as a whole are joining forces to frame the Chinese for COVID.
Correct. And I'm not one to say, oh, the Chinese are totally innocent and da 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 da. I don't know. So they could well share culpability.
I mean, they have some responsibility. It was in their damn country. I mean,
well, it was in their damn country. One extreme hypothesis is that somebody was in a position to frame the Chinese.
Oh, boom.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
right.
Sorry.
Yes, totally.
So that is a hypothesis, and in that case, the Chinese, well, they still would be guilty of doing dangerous lab work, but they wouldn't be guilty responsible for the outbreak itself.
Right. Okay. Right.
So that is a plausible,
very possible
scenario. Okay?
Given the history of the CIA, what they've done.
Right. And so I mean, that might seem outlandish to people, but I mean, it's we've spent, the system has put forward this thing of wasting 3 years on what was ultimately a hypothesis that the system now says it knew was wrong from virtually the beginning. Right. I mean, the indications are that if this is true, and if these lab workers were indeed the index cases, or at least predate the wet market outbreak. So they knew from early 2020 that the wet market thing was complete baloney.
Right.
And so, they've engaged in this, fake debate for all these years to just sort of, gain distance, right?
Right.
I mean, imagine a world in which the global public understood in early 2020 that this probably came out of a lab.
Well, they called us racist, the conspiracy theorists.
Hey,
Right.
Sam, you know exactly what, because it was said to you. You were told that you were crazy, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody, people who said this were, suspended from big tech platforms. You were called a nut job, and so on. And and that wasn't an accident. That was because articles were put into major publications, The Lancet and Nature Medicine, by very self-interested scientists, with major figures like Fauci and Jamie Farrar, who's now chief scientist for the World Health Organization, pulling the strings. And we know all of that now. Actually, we knew a good deal of that for a while now. So there was a concerted effort to dismiss the possibility of lab origins from the beginning, and I think for a very good reason, because a global public would have arisen and said, what the hell are you maniacs doing? I gotta upend my entire existence because you guys are creating, these deadly viruses that are apparently biowarfare. We're going to shut this down. And you would have had, I suspect, a massive global movement of, much of the people of the world saying that we're not going to put up with these crazy machinations by you people. So they had to prevent that possibility. So they had to put out a story that you're crazy if you think this. And now they're putting out the truth or something potentially closer to the truth in dribs and drabs, hoping for sort of a soft landing of all of this. And I saw a similar pattern with Iraq WMDs. You were certifiably nuts if before the Iraq invasion you said, I think they're wrong. I don't think that Iraq has WMDs. I mean, I didn't even say that. I said Bush is engaging in a systematic pattern of deceit about Iraq WMDs, because I could prove that. I couldn't prove definitively that Iraq didn't have any. And I was, called a weirdo, and although at that point, much, at least some of the left back then was somewhat reasonable, whereas, with COVID, much of the left just totally lost their minds.
Right.
And then, footnote to that is, after the Iraq invasion, they actually, there were actually stories. We found the WMDs. People might not remember this now, but there were several stories put out and then quietly retracted, and then put out again, and then quietly retracted. And I think the purpose of that was so that there wouldn't be this, storming of the Bastille moment. There wouldn't be this crystallizing moment where you have a majority of the public all of a sudden realizing this whole thing was a scam. If you arrange it so that people realize that it's a scam a little bit at a time,
gradually,
then you don't have the storming of the Bastille moment. And
that's exactly what I thought was going on with the Wall Street Journal article. I thought that this was like a dripping it out so that there isn't a freak out about it.
Right.
But nonetheless, I mean, if it is confirmed, I mean, just the journal running this is almost, to me, confirmation enough. But like, if it is confirmed that we do know, just intellectually, like, how do you get out of the thesis, the lab origin thesis now? Like, what is the intellectually, what's another way to go to dispute the lab origin thesis now that we know most likely that these three guys got COVID in November and were being funded by the US? Like, what?
Yeah,
and before the wet market. So like, how else can you do a zoonotic thing now? Make an argument like that.
I mean, they have put out other theories that that COVID was found in water supplies in Europe prior to all of this.
Oh.
The WHO report, which Peter Daszak, was, I don't think he was in charge of that, but he was on that committee along with some other of my favorite people. They claimed that it came to Wuhan through frozen food from elsewhere. So that you might still see people, pushing stories like that.
Yeah.
But this could be the end of the zoonotic origin theory, but I think that it doesn't necessarily mean that they've solved it, because what it means is that it didn't have a natural origin, but we still don't know what the unnatural origin was. Was it accidental? Was it intentional? Was it a frame up? And this is a discussion that we should have had 3 years ago, because it should have been obvious, given that they knew this information, that these November cases were people who were sick, who worked at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, if true, should have been disseminated to the public back then.
Okay.
So that becomes a scandal in of itself.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why didn't you say that?
Right.
And who held up that information?
Okay.
And you have such a weird cast of characters. One of the best answers we found so far was someone who testified before one of the congressional committees, and his name is David Feith. He is the son of Douglas Feith.
Oh.
One of the major quote unquote neocons.
Everybody's related. It's amazing.
It's like, I want to create a little wiki that just like gives a profile of all these people to show the interrelations and everything. So and he said that he
Doug Feith, was a neocon in the Bush administration during Iraq.
One of the, along with Wolfowitz and a handful of others that were really the tip of the spear in terms of pushing the Iraq War.
Right.
And I think he actually always had an interest in biowarfare. I've been meaning to double check that, but that's my memory.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, his son has a history at the Wall Street Journal, and he also. I'm hearing an echo now. Okay.
So am I.
Good. Okay. And he was at the State Department at the beginning of the pandemic, and he, in his testimony before Congress, recently said that he was told in no uncertain terms that talking about lab origins would open a Pandora's box, because then our dangerous lab work would come under scrutiny. And so we didn't want to talk about the Chinese dangerous lab work. So that's an interesting admission, So who told him that? Who shut down discussion? That that is perpetrating a massive fraud on the global public.
Wow.
I don't know what criminal statutes that would fall under, but I would be amazed that there wouldn't be some kind of criminal statute that would.
Amazing.
That would apply to this.
Amazing. Sam, I'm getting echo. Can you click settings and then audio, and then click echo cancellation if it's not clicked?
Sure thing. Settings and then audio.
Is echo cancellation clicked?
I'm trying to find audio. Sorry, let me type it in. Audio. I'm seeing sound. I'm sorry, I'm not the most technically adept person here.
Did you hit settings on StreamYard?
Oh no, I'm sorry. I hit settings on my Mac. I apologize. Again, I'm not the most. Okay, settings, audio, and echo cancellation is clicked.
Okay.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. Here, do you want me to click it and then it again?
Then it's not your fault.
Yeah.
All right. Now it's better. Now it's better.
Okay.
Now it's better.
clicked it.
Okay, good.
Clicked it.
So
Good.
that was fine because I wanted to segue there. You mentioned the WHO. Let's talk. Can you just give a real quick piece on the WHO, like who it's made up of now, and what do you think of it, and what is it? And then you know where I'm going with this, I think. But go ahead.
I think, I mean, the big thing going on with it, of course, WHO, called the pandemic. It has substantial powers. It's still headed by Tedros. Its new chief scientist is Jamie Farrar, who was head of the Wellcome Trust, which is kind of the British equivalent of the Gates Foundation. He played a role in both of those pillars of propaganda that I mentioned at the beginning, the Lancet letter and the Nature Medicine article, which were the two pillars which dismissed, under ridiculous pretenses, the possibility of lab origin.
Right.
And now he's chief scientist, which is insane.
Wow.
Right. He's like the last person on the world who should be chief scientist of the WHO. I think this is where you're going with this.
Yes.
Somebody who's, Jeffrey Sachs, who's a very, prominent person stationed at Columbia University, played a major detrimental role in beginning what was called the shock therapy treatment against the Soviet Union, which led to horrific economic conditions in the Soviet Union, and then sort of stepped back and tried to wash his hands of it after the ball got rolling. He was named head of the Lancet Commission in the late summer of 2020. And then he proceeded to name Peter Daszak, who is head of EcoHealth Alliance, who was responsible for the Lancet letter, pillar of propaganda, who funded the Wuhan Institute of Virology with money that he got from the NIH and USAID, claimed he had no conflicts of interest in all of this, was named on the WHO committee to find out pandemic origins, and then Jeffrey Sachs named him to head the Committee on Lancet Origins by the Lancet. I thought this was completely insane. I was working on a massive piece on Daszak at the time. I emailed Jeffrey Sachs. He, laying out much of what I knew. How can you be doing this? He never responded to that. I published my piece in December of 2020. By the spring of 2021, the Daszak narrative began to collapse. And then finally, in the summer of 2021, Sachs decides that Daszak is a bunch of hot air and isn't being straight with him and asks him to resign. So they never really filed a report on COVID origins. And then Sachs started saying, we really should investigate this. And then he eventually said, I think that it came out of a lab. In his final report, he had an online discussion which included Tedros, and which was basically an infomercial for the WHO.
Right. This is Jeffrey Sachs, who the reason we're talking about this is because Jeffrey Sachs has emerged over the last year as one of the main critics putting forth the lab origin theory, who's sounded like many times very much on our side here, and has said a lot of great things about it being most likely caused by the government funding, U.S. government funding.
Correct.
That it's probably originated. But what Sam has shown, and I think, is that he has a commitment to the World Health Organization.
Correct.
As, this global governing body that he believes, as do many people who are called globalists, should have power, basically sovereign power over every nation on earth to some extent. So, and
So, and in particular, he has an interest in doing this. Meryl Nass has done some interesting work on looking at the WHO treaty, which is being further empowered while all of this is going on.
Yep.
And she charges that he is trying to set up a scheme by which he has some nonprofit or set of nonprofits that will take a cut of all of this.
Wow.
I have not followed that terribly closely, but that's what Meryl Nass is charging. And I think Francis Boyle is saying some similar things as well, who wrote the Bioweapons Convention in the first place.
So next time Jeffrey Sachs does a live stream on one of your favorite shows, I'm talking to the audience right now, put a question in the chat about all this and see if he'll answer it.
Yeah. And, simultaneous, one other footnote on Sachs is that simultaneous to this, he's said some good things on Ukraine as well.
Yes, very good things. Great things.
And I suspect that that is also a way of lulling people into a sense of, oh, we can trust this guy.
Wow, so, you really don't trust him.
I don't. In part because I see this going on the Republican side as well. Josh Hawley, who is the Republican who sponsored the legislation to say, which he claimed will declassify all information regarding COVID origins, but doesn't, only declassifies information regarding the WIV. Just as he was, right before he did that, he also flipped on Ukraine. And he went on Hannity or some show, or maybe it was Laura Ingraham. He went on some Fox show, and they were like, wow, you're really sticking it to the man on Ukraine, so that he could come forward and talk about COVID origins, and people would trust him because he had, secured bona fides as being an anti-establishment figure on the Ukraine war. And let's face it, at this point, it doesn't matter if Sachs says something good on the Ukraine war. That's not going to stop the war in all likelihood, right? I mean,
okay.
I'm not impervious to feeling a sense of relief that somebody with a big name is saying,
right.
I think the U.S. did Nord Stream, but
right. We have 2 minutes, Michael. Is that cool?
I was just gonna say, I think I was gonna make the transition now in that I think the establishment knows that it's an uphill battle to win back the public on a lot of these issues, and I wouldn't put it past them to get creative like this. And you came on, you really wanted to talk about RFK Jr. and his foreign policy.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We're gonna have to do that over on Zoom.
Yeah. But quickly, isn't RFK also committed to WHO?
I have not heard him talk about it.
Oh, okay. I thought he was.
I mean, his organization, Children's Health Defense, has done good work scrutinizing a WHO treaty.
Okay.
But I have not heard him talk about it, so that makes me concerned. Why is he running to the border wall and not running to Fort Detrick?
Yeah,
the main U.S. so-called defense facility. I don't understand. I mean, if anything, he's not playing offense. I mean, I realize the recent blow up on Rogan and all of that, and I didn't listen to the whole thing on Rogan, but I talked to several people who did, and they told me that he didn't mention WHO, he didn't mention Jamie Farrar, he didn't mention all this stuff.
Yeah, he was mostly talking about mercury, which is fine for his biography, but it's not relevant necessarily.
Right. This is like Bernie Sanders not talking about income inequality. I mean, at least Bernie Sanders, when he, sheepdogged the Democrats into folding into the establishment, at least he talked about his signature subject.
Yeah.
Right. Kennedy's not doing that. And so that again causes me to.
And it's exactly his issue.
Check my wallet. What's going on here?
Yeah, and it's exactly his issue. It's right in his wheelhouse. He should be at the lead of this.
And the only time it's coming up is that when he's playing defense, when somebody says, "Oh, you said that vaccines cause autism," so we get into an argument about whether or not he's a nut job, and he's totally playing defense instead of saying, "What was the justification for these lockdowns? What was this? What was this? What about lab origin? What about all this? Why are we continuing to do gain of function?" He's not doing that, or he's doing that minimally from my point of view. So
he'll talk about the 1986 Vaccine Act, but he won't talk about the 1962 Vaccine Act.
Oh,
okay. Yeah. You know more than I do.
Okay.
What does that mean?
Oh, the Kennedy's first big.
Oh, really?
Talks about Reagan and getting
Okay, I didn't know that. I'll look that up. Please.
Kennedy got the ball rolling on that first.
The more you know about the Kennedys.
Please send that along.
Yeah.
Although I do have a positive piece up on the Kennedys recently, and that is JFK. Sorry. Oh, does that upset you? I'm sorry.
Yes. It's very offensive.
He really seemed to have tried to prevent Israel's acquisition of nuclear weapons. Which is
yes, but tactical. I saw your piece.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, which tactical. Is now. I mean, no one, not even the squad acknowledges they exist. You know. I mean, and he really seemed to have. I don't know how closely read my piece. I mean, Ben Gurion, the founding prime minister of Israel, resigned the day after Kennedy sent him a letter, basically saying,
"Yeah, but
this isn't endangering our relationship here."
That's just because he wanted the United States to control Israel, and if Israel became, that's all. Yeah,
probably. But I'd rather have one less nuclear power. Thank you. One nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I mean, it was but it was a tactic in service of the global hegemon. I mean, you know what I mean? That's all. It was just serving the empire, the American empire.
Yeah, without a doubt. But it at least,
this is good stuff. We need to be doing it on Zoom.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry. So right now we're going to go to Unregistered Live right after Unreported. Sam's going to hang out for a little while, hopefully.
Sure.
And if you're a patron of the show, you can come join us. You can go join up right now at patreon.com/unregistered. Michael, can you show the URL?
Oh yeah. Patreon.com/unregistered.
And if you go there, the URL is right there in the current chat or whatever it is called on Patreon, and you'll see it. Just click on it, join it. You'll come to the Zoom meeting, and the three of us will be there hanging out. And it's super fun. It's not recorded. You can be completely anonymous. You don't have to show your face. No one needs to know you're there. And it's not recorded. So come on in, have fun. And thank you, Sam. And we'll see you in a minute on the other side here.
Peace.
Sounds great.
Thank you. Bye.